Now we're going to start taking a look a little bit at animation. So let me switch this really quick. As I showed in the example a few videos ago, there was a difference between generations of the systems in that the more that the systems progressed, the more sprites they could add to an animation cycle, which created much smoother animation. So for example, in the case of like this T-Rex, if I hit play for its idle, I've got this little bit of an up and down. I'm able to get some secondary animation movement with the tassel on the hair and the tail movement up and down. And I can even get to more complex animations like a roar. And then get some of the smoothing in and out. But I don't have to make animations complex to be able to make something that's powerful. So when you're first starting out, don't feel overwhelmed. Don't feel like you have to do every single frame. Because even with the more advanced animations, we're still giving the illusion that there's more going on than there is. We put in just enough sprites in the animation to let somebody playing the game fill in the rest for themselves. For example, this T-Rex is bending down to roar, but there's a lot of missing frames in there. Goes up for the wind up, down for the roar, and then down into the full roar and back and forth a few times. But you see there's big gaps. So from there to there, I'm not doing the in-betweens. It's just as it's being animated, the person playing it fills those in-betweens in their imagination. And so there still is some trickery to it. In fact, if it was too smooth, it wouldn't feel like a retro game. That's one place where some of the modern games are trying to go for a retro look, but it doesn't feel quite right. And it's usually because of this, because they'll usually have something that may even be vector art that's got a rig on it, and then they'll animate an arm to like move, and it's a smooth movement filling in every frame in between. But it's actually that stuttering that gives you more of that retro feel, depending on what type of a retro game you're going for. You know, which generation, which console, things like that. But let me take a look at this character right here. I'm just going to select him and look at his idle. So right now, he's got 4 frames that define this idle. He's got that first one that's the start, goes up a little, then the top of the idle, and back down, and then back to the beginning. So it's 4 frames, but really it's 3, because the second and the fourth are the exact same. But what I can do is I can still get an idle animation by removing even those in-betweens. I'm going to copy this to extend it out. Drag it out. So now I've just got 2 frames. But even with this, I can still get the feel of an idle. And maybe because there's only 2, I'll slide it a little bit closer to get a little bit better feel for it. It's still moving. And the same is true for any of these other animations. I can actually cut out frames and still give an illusion. It'll just be a little bit more poppy. And with the earlier games, we didn't really notice it as much because that was just kind of the expectation. All right, so let me shift over here, pop up Photoshop really quick. So the same thing can be used to start animating your own stuff. You can take any character that you design, and so once you get that first frame and you kind of design what the look is, then it's not too hard to make adjustments and create movement. Start simple, start easy. Worry about one frame and then another. So here's this character doing a 2-frame walk. And right now I'm just turning a layer on and off to show the effect. But this is how I build it up. There are other people that might take different approaches. I prefer to work with my characters all in a single file, or at least a character in their own single file, and then I can layer it up by the animation so that I can compare it against the drawings that are underneath. So in this case with the idle, I can check the first one against the second one. Well, what's the movement up? And I can hide the individual layers. So I can see, hey, this is moving up. Here's that next one that's even higher. And then I can look at maybe some of the other animations. So if I'm doing an upper attack, turn that on really quick. I can compare the movement of the frames below to the next frames up. So same thing. I've got the start. I've got this wind up. And actually, let me hide the shadow. So I can see that that's going to move to this wind up. I can get the start of the punch. I can get this part where it hits. And I went through a couple variations trying to figure out their hair, because this was still early on in the character before I finally figured out kind of where I wanted it, how far I wanted it to go out. And so I keep some of my old versions around, but in the end, you know, here's where it transitions from here to here. And then back to that, like the follow through, and then the wind down to go back to return to this punch. So let me pull up Unity again. So if I do this upper attack, there we go. Then I can play that. And then, yep. So anyways, and then the same thing, but being used for super attack, where I just hold it a little bit longer. And I can give that illusion that there's more going on. All right. So let me jump back over here to Photoshop. I'm going to guide you through it using the character that I did 2 videos ago, just to do a simple idle. So once more, the way I'm working is that I have that background, that, you know, bright pinkish purple. If you notice with some of these, they have slightly different backgrounds, but it's the same idea. What's a color that I'm not going to use regularly, even though I kind of brought it into his pants a little bit. But I'm not going to use it regularly. So it'll make anything I'm working on stand out, that I can use as kind of my alpha channel pixels. And so I've got that as a background. I've got this layer, which is kind of like the standard idle, or the idle 1 pose. And I can even come into a program like Photoshop and name that. So that'll be idle_1. And then I'll create a new layer, but I'm going to build it off of the one that's already here, because when I'm doing more complex animations, then I might actually create layers and build up, you know, something more dramatic and show, hey, here's where the arm movements are, and maybe he ducks his head way down, like he does a big flap, and his gut comes down lower, maybe his legs spread out, you know, a little bit wider. And then I can test these against each other, just like doing rough pencil tests. This is essentially me creating pencil tests. So when I do complex animations like that I did with the T-Rex, I did it all in rough pencil tests first, with the wind up and the roar and the movement. And I actually put it into the game engine and animated it with the rough pencil test first to make sure it worked before I came back and added all the detail. As you can see with this, there was quite a bit of detail that I had to work out for each of the sprites that I created for this thing. And so I didn't want to put in all that polish work before I even knew if the motions were right. But let me jump back over here to Photoshop. So with this, I can do this rough pencil test and go, yeah, that's what the character's going to do. He's going to lift his arms and duck his head down for this next sprite. That's not actually what I'm going to do here, but this is a way to do it. And like I said, when I do more complex animations, that is absolutely the way I do it. However, when I do something where I know there's going to be limited movement, I'm going to start off with just this first idle, and I'll duplicate the layer. And I will just call this idle 2. And that way I've got that foundation to work from. I know it's mostly where I want it, but then I'm going to make some slight modifications. And so I have to think in this character's terms, what's his idle going to look like? For one character, an idle might be standing there and, oh, let me back up there, and breathing in. That could be the idle. Maybe it's a, you know, more of a downward motion. This character's already capped at the top of this frame, so I probably don't want to go up, but maybe down, maybe do something with the arms. And so I have to think about what that looks like, what the movement's going to be. Maybe it's just like a little knee bend, like he's revved up and ready to go. So maybe most of the game this character's running, and so when he finally gets to an idle point, he's like just bouncing up and down. You can see his knees bend. It's going to depend on the character and the type of motion that makes sense for whatever the character is being used for. So in this case, I know he's at the top of the frame, so I do need him to go down for this idle. So maybe he's just winded, like he just, you know, just kind of getting that bend in his back a little bit, and the shoulders roll a little bit further forward. So maybe I will do something like that. But I can start by just grabbing selections, because I'm literally just moving these solid pixels as I'm adjusting, and then I can fill in the gaps underneath if I need to. But this way I can very quickly start building up this character and their movement. And in fact, I'll also grab these gray pixels that are right underneath, because I know those are going to move down into the shirt, and I don't need to move it far. I really don't. Even just a single pixel movement for this character, because it is such a small image, that 1 pixel is a big movement. The larger the character is, the more pixels that are in there, the more you may have to shift the movement. So for like the dinosaur, that T-Rex, I really had to have some distance and movement, because 1 pixel movement would have just felt like a jitter. But for this character, 1 pixel's a lot. And so you need to think in those kinds of terms of this character really can't move very much out. And so I may grab things like, maybe I'm going to have his arms expand out a little bit. So I may actually grab this and move it over just a touch. So like he shrugs, but his shoulders go out just a little bit. And this may not be the right movement, so I may need to come back and change this. And let me see. Even as I'm moving that, I don't know that I necessarily like that. Maybe it's like maybe he is actually lifting up his arms. It seems kind of counterintuitive though. So this is where animation's fun. You got to kind of feel it out. No, I'm going to just have his arms slump a little bit rather than do something like this where he's more agitated. So I'm going to take the arms, select them, and I'm going to drop those a pixel as well. And so this is just simple matter of selection. If I was doing it the other way, where I was actually drawing it in, doing more of that pencil test, then I would simply paint it in solid and do it exactly the way I did for the first one when I was building that up. Same thing over here. I'm going to grab these. I am not going to grab any pixels that are going to be conflicting. So even though this will move down, I'm not going to move it beyond this point into the foot further, because that's already kind of pushing with that foot. So I'll just move this part down a pixel. And I'll have to bring these back because I had deleted some of this. Deselect that. Whoop, deselect. Maybe I'll just do this. Okay, and this is also where I noticed that now I've got a gap, so there's the gut coming in. So in between these two, it's just an up and down, which honestly, this alone can be enough to start developing an idol, but I'm not liking it because it's almost too simplistic, and so I want to, what can I do? Well, maybe I will splay the hands out just a little bit. Maybe I'll get a little bit of the knee bend in there. So let's see how I can get that set up. So let me hide that back one again. If I want to bring the hands out just a little bit further, at this point, rather than grabbing things and moving, I'm just going to start painting in. So I'm just going to have this be moved over just slightly. And maybe I'll have that knee come in here just a little bit, like he's bending his knees. Maybe these will straighten out a little bit. And actually this would still be straight because that leg's coming forward, but maybe I've got this shifting up a little bit and this just filling in a little bit more. Almost like it's getting a little bit of a shadow there. There we go. Still not perfect, but it's kind of getting me where I need to be. Bring that there. Just trying to figure out exactly how I want to handle this. Because I'm not sure. Let me jump back and forth and kind of get a feel. Yeah, it's feeling like it's just breaking at this point. So if I'm going to do it, I really need to exaggerate it. So I'll probably take this arm and bring it clear over. Like really have it go wide here. Widen that up a little bit more. Yet again, just to try and add a little more exaggeration and to bring this to life a little bit more. And this one I'll take further out. So just maybe I'll delete that out right there. There we go. Now I'm starting to get a little bit more of that motion. I want his gut to go down a little bit too. So since I'm taking the rest of the body down and his knees are bending slightly, I need this to drop a pixel as well. So I'm going to actually bring these down just a little bit. Bring this down a row. And I'll probably pull those back there a little bit more as well. Bring this down a row, bring this over here, and maybe his gut widens that area out just a little bit more. There we go. Now we're starting to get a feel for this movement. Yeah, and sometimes these things work good where you get that the visual shift, and other times it just feels like an accident. In this case, that feels more like an accident, so I will change this back really fast. Okay, so I'll just let that move up and down. And it would be nice if I could do something like the hair tussling a little bit, but it also may be a little too much. So, you know, I'll try raising this up really quick. Almost like, whoop. Let me delete that out. Almost like it's just going up a little bit. Just that little bit at the back. The hair is kind of flipping up. But now it just looks like it's staying still because I'm not getting enough of motion. So this can be trial and error, and it usually is. So that was a mistake. So I will actually take this right back down. Drop that to there. And I've got that gap I need to fill in, so I will deselect that really fast and drop that in. All right, but this is how I can build up a simple idle. I encourage you, now that you're seeing these tools and how this can be used, to play around with this. Try doing an idle, try doing a walk, try doing other movements. Keep it simple. Quick tip about the difference between idles and walks. Idles, I can do it from that beginning static pose and all those idles. For a walk, you're going to want that to not start with this pose. You're going to want it to begin, let me transition really fast. You're going to want it to begin in one position of the walk and then the other if you're only doing 2 frames. If you're doing more frames, then yes, you can get the motion and the walkthrough. But if you're only got 2 sprites to define it, there's one and the other with the crossover. And a quick tip, don't get the legs exactly the same when it crosses back and forth. Otherwise, it just looks like it's shimmering. Make sure they're slightly offset on one or the others of the steps, at least in this medium, because then it'll look more natural. It'll look like it's meant to shift. So if I go back to like this character, for example, you see it's not exactly the same distance apart as they're walking. And so you can get that feel. But play around with it. Have fun and explore. Don't overwhelm yourself with this. Just play. Start simple, like 2 sprites for an animation, and see what you can come up with. But anyways, hopefully this is helping you out a lot, and I'll come back with some more videos to continue this process. Bye.